Okay, let's talk about where we're at with David Gazzard from DPG Advisory and Ben Oquist, the Executive Director at the Australia Institute. Gentlemen, this is just chaos, what we're seeing at the moment with the states fighting the feds, National Cabinet. What happened?
Well, you'd have to say there are two things that probably have come out of today. The first is you would only be having this debate where you're unlike some of the other countries where they've been desperate to get whatever vaccine they can because they've had hundreds of thousands of deaths because of COVID. So we haven't gone through that. So it almost looks like we expect to have a vaccine that's got no risks or no side effects whatsoever. The other is that if you're going to fight over it between a state and federal level, the only people I can see really winning out of that are the anti-vaxxers, who can now say, see, there's a dispute over the risks here, without anyone putting the risks into context. So you've got minuscule, tiny risks of suffering any after effects at all out of AstraZeneca, but it's now been brought into disrepute by various levels of government who want to go only with Pfizer, which carries its own side effects.
Ben?
Well, it is a mess, and David's right. The big winners are the anti-vaxxers. I think Scott Morrison, if he's had his time again, wouldn't have made that statement on Monday night. It's sent confusion into the community. We've had different advice about whether to get AstraZeneca or Pfizer. But let's be honest, the changing advice has been partly, or suggestions from politicians, has been partly led by the lack of Pfizer, by the lack of enough Pfizer vaccine. And because we've got so much AstraZeneca and we haven't got enough Pfizer, it's leading to different messages from politicians. And of course, the winner is the anti-vax movement, and it's a disaster.
You've got this situation, though, at Wimbledon. Dame Sarah Gilbert received a standing ovation. She was the scientist who came up with AstraZeneca. She's seen as a hero in the United Kingdom.
Yeah.
They have absolutely copped it. And then you've got some of our health officials saying, raising the risk profile of this thing, when ATAGI itself, the ATAGI advice 17th of June says people under 60 can still get it after consulting their GPs. It seems like the Prime Minister didn't change the advice as much as highlight one part of it.
Well, National Cabinet is not working. National Cabinet didn't make that recommendation. There's no point having a National Cabinet, no point bringing people together and then not National Cabinet speaking with one voice. I think it was a mistake for him to come out with something that National Cabinet hadn't agreed to. Of course, the big difference between the UK and the US is they've used the time to get vaccination done. The US at 50%, the UK at over 60%, Australia last in the OECD. Yes, we've had a very effective health response that has meant our economy has done well and our health has done well, but we missed the opportunity to get the vaccination rollout done fast and quickly while we had that time.
That overstates several points, Ben. The reality was here, we actually took our time because people weren't dying. This is my point, right? We are having this debate because there's been no deaths. We have had the luxury of time.
Not luxury,
whereas the UK and the US and some of these places where they manufacture all those vaccines, we don't, had to pass it with emergency measures. So they took this stuff before it had been properly tested. We wanted to test it properly. That has happened. The advice has not changed. National Cabinet does not make up medical advice. And as Kieran's just pointed out, the advice from ATAGI has not changed. All that's changed is the government giving indemnity to doctors, which the doctors themselves asked for, so they could administer in an informed position with their patients.
Well, National Cabinet
the other reason, hang on, just let me finish here. The other reason we did it this way was that the government saw the primary route for the vaccine to be delivered to patients through their GP. So they had their medical history. They could do it with informed consent rather than jamming them through huge stadiums to get it out as quickly as possible. Don't forget either, this has been a global crisis. Every country has had to find its way in the dark about the best way to deal with this. Looking back now and trawling through the
coming last in terms of, and I understand you make some valid points in terms of, spending more time and going through it and so on, but coming last in the OECD, That's not a great look, is it?
Where would you rather be? I've seen those charts, right? Where would you rather be? The places where, like the UK, 128,000 deaths versus our 800 or 900?
That's not because we were slow on vaccination rollout. That's because we had a tough health response. That's not because we were slow on vaccination.
We certainly had a tough health response, but the vaccine was allowed to be tested properly and then rolled out through the community. Along the way, a range of things happened that no one could have foreseen. The EU reshored the contracted supply of vaccines they had guaranteed to give to Australia. So we no longer had access to that. Luckily, we set up the supply of AstraZeneca. AstraZeneca has done 2/3 of the vaccinations across the world. And we're now calling it into question for something that's been done in a vastly successful way across all age cohorts worldwide.
And you're seeing a lot of younger people go out. I know from anecdotal experience, seeing friends, loved ones saying, I'm going to get it, and talk to their GP. They've got no underlying issues, so they get the thumbs up and they've had the jab.
A lot are and a lot not. A lot aren't. You read the front pages of the papers today and you watch health ministers and health officials say something very different from they heard from the Prime Minister on Monday night. In the end, that is the problem. These huge mixed messages all week, and really what you must say is a kind of chaotic messaging today. Now, I think...
Do you think for the Prime Minister, this is we talk about these critical moments in politics, but do you think this is coming back to bite him in a political sense?
I think it's hard for any leader in the middle of a rolling, chaotic pandemic crisis. You have to be able to change and shift. Look,
absolutely right.
That's undeniable. You do. But the point of bringing National Cabinet was that we could keep that messaging clearer. I think the Prime Minister did well by going overseas and talking to world leaders, but he has been at a disadvantage being in the lodge, being remote, and not seeming to have the authority.
David, just finally, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think being locked up and being out of sight, it makes it really hard.
Nothing against being in the lodge.
No, absolutely.
He should live in the lodge.
He's had to go through quarantine, there's no doubt about that, and the things that he achieved overseas were worth it. And I think you're quite right. Where the circumstance has dictated it, there has had to be changes. And no one doubts that the vaccine, don't get me wrong, the vaccine should be rolled out as quickly as it can. And this was one of the ways to try to do it.
Do you think in a month or two from now we'll look back and things will be...
Yeah.
Critical mass will be there?
The vaccine rate is speeding up all the time. There's now 25% of Australians that have had the first dose, and that's going faster. We'll be catching up soon.
David Gazzard, Ben Oquist, gents, as always, thanks. Appreciate it.
20% get nothing. They're really unfair tax cuts.
People want to see much stronger action from the government when it comes to climate change.
It's no coincidence that we have a wages crisis in Australia.
Transitioning to net zero emissions, it doesn't seem like there's much room for gas.